Welcome back to the School of Muscle podcast. Today I have on Dr. Emily Manoogian, and Dr. Manoogian is a chronobiologist and clinical researcher at the Salk Institute for Biological Studies and knows a heck of a lot more about chronobiology and circadian rhythms and stuff like that than I do. And today that we're going to kind of cover that, as well as maybe some practical implications for specific individuals that are interested in fitness and health and different things like that. So I know you've been asked this question several times before, but maybe just to make sure we're all kind of on the same page here. I wouldn't say it's necessarily like the term chronobiology. I don't think that's necessarily become super mainstream yet. So if we could just cover like what chronobiology is, what circadian rhythms are, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So chronobiology is literally just the timing of biology. And circadian rhythms are one of many different temporal rhythms, but really the main one that's discussed and studied. And circadian, it just means about a day. Like circa is about, dian is a day. And so we're talking about daily rhythms. And we talk about it in humans a lot, and that's probably what we're mainly talking about today. But circadian rhythms are really a core aspect of all life, from bacteria to plants to all animals. We evolved to live on a 24-hour world. And so our bodies adapt to that pattern. And so our behaviors will affect how our body interprets them at different times of day.
Awesome. And just so everyone's clear, this isn't like some woo science stuff. Like I feel like sometimes people hear circadian rhythms and they automatically jump to like, I don't know, pulver eating and stuff like that. It's like, guys, no, it's not like this. This is legit science that is backing up these different rhythms. And like you said, it's seen in like all walks of biology in which different animals have these different patterns and stuff like that. Yeah. So I think that with that, one place I would like to start is in kind of fitness realms. There used to be this like old adage of you should never eat food after like 6 p.m. because you shouldn't eat right before bed because XYZ reason. And I think that kind of swung back to the other side of it doesn't really matter when you eat. It just matters that your total calories are within a certain range. You hit a certain level of macronutrients, and when you eat is much less of a thing to consider. But it seems like recently or over the last handful of years, when you eat seems to have certain effects. So what do you kind of think about this? Does when you eat matter? Should people not eat right before bed? And I know I just opened up a big can of worms. So
yeah, I'll try to stay on topic. There's so much to go into there. Yes, when you eat matters, but just like anything, there's nuance within biology and context matters as well. So someone who is super fit and working out all the time is not going to see the same kind of negative consequences as someone who might have pre-diabetes and is more sedentary and is eating a huge amount of, really poor nutrient food right before bed and having really high, glucose just before bed. So there's definitely a range of things and what it means to eat at different times and what food you're having and what, context your body is in. So there's definitely nuance. So I want to respect that because I think that's important when you're considering what's right for you. And I know with exercise, sometimes that can push meals later just because you don't have time to work out until after you get home from work, and then your meal might be later than someone else who maybe wasn't having that other task or was able to work out earlier in the day. And exercise is obviously important. So I wouldn't say don't exercise anymore so you can stop eating by 6. I think that's a silly comment. But at the same time, yeah, you do need to stop eating so your body can rest. So a couple points. One, food is a kind of an excitatory cue to your brain. It helps you stay awake. So this is why we see like a lot of truck drivers, or if you're doing a road trip and you're tired, you start snacking because it does help you stay awake. Second is if you eat a lot before you go to bed and you have a lot of, especially if you have a high carb load and your glucose goes up, once you go to sleep, your body has a very hard time, not even just sleep, but once it gets later in the night, your body has a very hard time processing that glucose and getting it out of the blood. And a lot of that's because the circadian system is anticipatory, so it actually coordinates how your organs functions at different times of day. So for instance, melatonin is released at night. That actually suppresses your insulin, so it stops your ability to store that glucose away, right? So there was actually a really nice study that came out a little less than a year ago from a group at Harvard, and in cell metabolism that showed if you eat late at night before bed, your glucose levels stay high throughout the time that you're sleeping. And your body really needs to be in a fasted state at that time. So your brain isn't going to get the same rest. Your digestive system isn't going to get the same rest. You're really kind of compromising how your body recovers at night. So even if you fall asleep, you're not really getting the same type of restorative sleep as you might. So getting a lot of food before you go to bed can be quite disruptive, and not even just food. Like if you look at alcohol, for instance, yes, that can have a lot of carbs as well. But even if you look at some of the lower carb options, or you're thinking straight alcohol, that really disrupts your sleep as well. So you might fall asleep, but the quality of sleep you're getting is not quite good. So what we try to recommend is waiting at least 3 hours before you go to bed where you're only consuming water. And that really allows your body and mind to kind of relax and get a proper sleep at night. But the one thing I'll clarify, sorry, one more thing. It's not a clock hour that is the right hour for you. So saying 6 p.m. or 7 p.m., it depends on what your schedule is. If you go to bed at 10 p.m., you're going to need to stop eating at a different time than someone who goes to bed at 1 a.m. So you have to make it relative to your schedule. And it's been oversimplified by saying certain time on a clock. And really, that's not what matters. It matters what your body is experiencing relative to your schedule.
Gotcha. So it's not necessarily like stop eating after 6 o'clock at night, just blanket statement for everybody. It's maybe within 3 hours from bed, cut the food off and just kind of stick to water there. Is that right?
Exactly. And if you're forcing yourself to wake up early in the morning, maybe you have a commute, or you have to wake up earlier than your body would want to wake up. It's with an alarm. Maybe it's even still dark outside, depending on the time of year. Eating first thing in the morning can be just as bad if your body is not ready for that yet. So waiting about an hour after you wake up kind of lets your body prepare for that. So it's really kind of just creating a little buffer. So you're eating when you're active. And you're not eating when your body's trying to rest. I mean, that's kind of the oversimplification of it. But if you keep that in mind, that's kind of the big picture of figuring out when should I really be consuming calories.
And the main physiological reasons to not do that, it sounds like, are because, for one, it gives your body kind of a chance to rest. And what do you kind of mean by that? Like what's going on there? Why is it, I guess this sounds like a stupid question, why is it important for your body to have this period to where it's just kind of like in more of a restful state while you're sleeping or during the night, rather than like trying to break down food and process different things like that?
Yeah, so I say rest, but really I mean not processing new things, not taking in new information, not having to break down new nutrients, because throughout the day you store all this glucose. And then during the night, you release it back into your body. So you have this rhythm of insulin and glucagon. Insulin's going to take that glucose out of your bloodstream and store it away. And at night, when insulin is suppressed, glucagon comes out and releases sugars that you've already stored back into your system. So this is when you break down fats. This is when you kind of go through all the nutrients you've stored throughout the day, or tap into fat stores that you already have. And if you're bringing in a lot of new calories late at night, you're never going to break down those other stores that you have. So it's very hard to lose weight if you're eating late at night, because you're never really going to break down that fat. You're not really doing that during the day. And it's hard to get enough of a calorie deficit during the day when you're awake, because your body's going to keep the glucose within your body. So that's one aspect of it. The other part is there's different things that happen within your digestive tract, even of just, you can kind of think of it like street sweeping or like cleaning a road. If you need to do maintenance work, you can't do it if there's still cars coming down the street. And so there's a lot of repair to many different organs that's going on at night that can't really be done if it's taking in new nutrients. And then you're also disrupting molecular clocks. So like you said, circadian medicine is very hard science. Every cell in your body that has DNA has a molecular clock. And there's, especially throughout the body, not so much in certain parts of the brain, but throughout the body, they're sensitive to nutrient availability. So you can actually shift your clocks and kind of tell your body it's the wrong time of day just by eating at the wrong time. So there's kind of a wide range of effects that eating really late at night can have. And, it'll happen to us all occasionally, just like you're going to have a day where you're going to consume more alcohol and desserts at a party than most days. And that's fine on occasion. But doing that regularly, or eating really late at night, or really erratically even, can send really mixed cues to the body and not really let you get that restorative kind of time that your body needs.
I think your analogy of the street sweepers is perfect. Like, you can't necessarily clean up the roads when the cars are still going by. So similar thing with your digestive system. You can't necessarily like process and clean things out when you still have food that's being digested and new things breaking down. And similar to kind of what you said with the circadian biology of like you sending a cue to your body of potentially like, hey, we're eating food. This is like a period to be active and to be awake right before you're trying to go to bed. And to me, it's, sounds similar to like light exposure, in which I think Dr. Huberman has popularized this a lot of like getting outside early in the morning, getting that sunlight, and then kind of avoiding light later in the day, to where it sounds like similarly with your food intake, avoiding it like in that few hour window right before bed helps kind of let your body get in a rhythm of, okay, it's time to kind of settle down into a restful state right now rather than eating food and being active.
Absolutely. Yeah. So when we think about how our behaviors can affect our biological clocks, and our circadian rhythms, light and food are the two biggest cues that we know. And light more directly affects the clocks in your brain that are controlling your behavioral patterns. And food is going to more directly affect your metabolism and your muscle function. And they all feed back on each other and they're interrelated. But if you're thinking about direct action, that's kind of how that goes. And research is really just starting to pick up on how exercise also affects these clocks and how they kind of integrate in. And it has to be kind of a stronger cue. It's not as blunt it's not as intense or potent of a cue as light or food. And so I think it'd been more subtle, but there's definitely a lot of interesting research coming out there. So, again, exercise is always good, but exercising just before you go to sleep can be really intense stimulation cue for your body, right? And it depends. If you're doing a calming yoga, that's very different than doing like a high intensity workout. But again, trying to give your body that buffer and trying to think of every way that you can tell your body, yes, it's time to rest. So dim to no light, not eating, calming your body down. And, even social interactions can feed in on these things. And that I think is more obvious in more human models. If you're going to have a big fight with a significant other, that's going to be hard to fall asleep right after, right? And so if you think about it as kind of a big picture of how can I tell my body it's time to rest? Yeah, it's light, it's food, it's physical activity, it's even social interaction. But light and food definitely have the most kind of research behind it, both in human and animal models.
And that definitely coincides with my kind of anecdotal experience, where I remember like in high school when we'd have baseball practice at like 7 a.m, I'd be like basically up out in the daylight, working out right away in the morning. And I felt like my sleep later on in the day was so much better on those days, to where I'd get up and exercise outside in the sunlight early in the morning, as there's just something about that helped me sleep late at night. And I think that in part that's now supported by research in which, hey, getting outside earlier in the morning and out in that sunlight might help you kind of set your rhythms for the day, in which once it gets later on in the day, you might have an easier time kind of winding down. And it sounds like the same is true kind of in reverse, where like if you did a workout, outside in sunlight right before you try to go to bed, you might have a really hard time with doing that. So
absolutely,
it sounds like for kind of best results, someone that is maybe exercising as well might want to avoid like strenuous exercise within, that kind of couple hour window before going to bed. And then maybe also avoiding kind of a large meal right before bed. Does that sound fair?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the only evidence we've ever seen against intense morning workouts is in individuals with diabetes. And this is still kind of, the research it's just kind of coming out. It's been smaller studies showing that if you do have type 2 diabetes, working out in the morning on a fasted state can have some actual negative consequences, like the body tries to overcompensate and that can get tricky. But that's a very specific category, and I'll just give that caveat. But if you do not have diabetes, your normal glucose regulation, you're exercising, yes, absolutely. Get that sun in the morning. Tell your body this is morning. We're waking up. We're moving. Have your nice big breakfast in the first or lunch in the first half of your day. And then really it should be kind of a downward trend for the rest of the day to kind of say, okay, that we did our big stuff and we can still be active, but then it's time to chill. And trying to relax light and food and exercise all together really creates this very clear signal to your body that it is time to rest. And absolutely what you described is a wonderful way to kind of keep your body on track and have a very natural rhythm, and you will get that much better sleep at night.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that kind of covers into the nighttime really well there. And we also cover the morning. But one thing that you mentioned there as well was that you might want to avoid eating right away in the morning, especially if you get up like quite early. So what would be your recommendation there? Like say someone, maybe they get up super early and it's maybe still dark outside. Are they okay with having something to eat like right when they get up, or should they maybe kind of postpone that a little bit later in the day, or what's kind of your recommendation when it comes to that?
Yeah. So in general, if I'm going to make a blanket statement, I usually like to say wait about an hour, but obviously there's some nuance here, just like everything in biology, it's always on a scale. The reason for that is melatonin is still high, your insulin suppression is still suppressed, and so it's harder to store away glucose. So if you're going to have something in the morning, in America at least, a lot of the times it's pretty carb heavy. A lot of cereals and oats and breads and or maybe donuts even, right? And then you can get this really big glucose spike. And if your body's not ready for it yet, that can be a big problem. If you're waking up super early because you're just an early person and that you have an early chronotype, which is a whole other thing we could get into if you want to. But if you're just an early person and you're naturally awake and you're naturally hungry, it's probably not the same thing as someone who is exhausted, woke up with an alarm, isn't even really that hungry, but they have this adage in their head that breakfast is important, so they force themselves to eat. That probably means that your body is not ready for food. And so even waiting at 30 minutes or an hour, getting some light, even if it's artificial light, if it's outside, even if it's dark outside, can be helpful to kind of let your body wake up for a second before you start eating. And it can be a little longer. It doesn't have to be exactly 1 hour after. I just like to say that's kind of a minimum buffer. So if you can prepare food ahead of time or prepare food to take to work and just have it, like an hour or two later, frequently that is easier on your body to digest. The other thing is variability is a big issue. So again, the circadian system partially exists to anticipate what your body's going to need to do and then prepare it to do that. So for instance, you have a cortisol peak before you wake up in the morning to help you wake up. And actually the misalignment of that with daylight savings time switches is one of many reasons we have an increase in heart attacks, right? It's not just that, but it's a piece of it. And so it prepares your body. It's going to prepare enzymes to break down food. It's going to prepare the insulin and glucagon balance, all those different things. And so when you eat at really different times every day, especially first and last meals, if those are varying a lot, if you eat too early and your body's not ready for it, you're not going to process the food the right way. And again, occasionally that's going to happen. You have an early whatever, you have a flight, whatever. It might happen occasionally, but doing that regularly and having that irregularity can really compromise your glucose regulation over time. So having a regular meal once your body's really awake, and that's kind of what that means for you. But usually waiting about an hour is a good kind of general rule to say, okay, my body is ready for food now, and I can start my day and kind of go about it that way.
Gotcha. And I think it's kind of cool that some of the research aligns with what a lot of people will kind of feel intuitively. Like I feel like some people wake up and they're just like, I don't want any food right now.
Yeah.
And it seems like maybe in part, some of that is because like your body's just legitimately not ready to physiologically process some of that food at that point. And I know for me personally, that's kind of how I feel in the morning. In the morning, I don't even want to look at food. I just get outside, I walk this guy for about 40 minutes in the morning. And then after that, I'm kind of ready to have something to eat and start my day. So
absolutely,
I think that well aligns with my experience there. And one thing that you mentioned there was that it might be not a good idea in particular to have like a big kind of like sugary, carb heavy meal at that point of the day. And that kind of leads me into how does what someone's eating play into this? So like, for example, a lot of people that are into bodybuilding and fitness and stuff like that, they'll particularly want to eat protein right before bed, as there's research that suggests that will increase rates of muscle protein synthesis throughout the night, which might theoretically lead to more long-term muscle growth. So that's kind of been a thing in the bodybuilding circles to have a bolus of protein right before bed. So should they also be like wary of kind of doing something like this, or does the macronutrient that you're kind of having that meal surrounding matter, or what are your kind of thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think a little of both. So yes, the macronutrients matter. Having an avocado at night is very different than having a donut or a beer and a burrito. Those are very different things. And obviously for a very fit community, you're probably not doing this quite as much. But if you just look at America, a lot of what you eat at night is beer, alcohol, nachos, burritos, chocolate. It's not a salad with an avocado with, just like these very healthy things.
Grilled chicken. And,
yeah. And there's even evidence to show your food preference changes at night to be more indulgent, right? Just with any kind of state where you might be tired, or same thing, if you have to wake up super early in the morning, just we're like, oh, we'll treat ourselves to this thing to make our feel better. It's like very prescriptive treatments that we give ourselves with really poor quality food. But to your question, yes, it does matter. Protein's probably not going to have the same effects on, it's not going to affect your glucose regulation the same way that having a large carb intake would. I would still kind of caution away from doing it just before bed. Again, if you can give even an hour or two buffer, I think that's better than just doing any kind of eating just before bed. Your body still has to process it. And if it's sleeping, it's not going to process it the same way. You're still going to get that protein in your system, if you have it 3 hours before bed than if you have it 30 minutes before bed. So I wouldn't think that that's going to be a huge problem. But research is still kind of really going into the macronutrient division between time of day. This actually comes up for individuals that are doing like night shift work. If they do need to eat, what kind of foods are there certain foods that are going to be worse than others? And I think there's a lot of interesting research to be done there. It's grants I've applied for trying to look at that. So hopefully we'll have more data on that for you soon. But understanding that macronutrient breakdown is absolutely important. And the other thing is there's some individuality to this. So there's a few different things. One, there's also this phenomenon called afternoon diabetes, where if you do a glucose tolerance test in the morning, you might come out normal. And if you do it around, late afternoon, you might actually look diabetic. And again, this isn't going to be for a completely normal population, but maybe for a pre-diabetic population or along those lines where you might be kind of borderline. But you do process glucose differently at different times of day. And one of the coolest ways you can look at this is actually with continuous glucose monitors, which in the US, unfortunately, you can't get over the counter yet. And they are designed for individuals with glucose regulation issues. However, a lot of studies are really cool where you can wear one, you can eat the same, little protein shake 4 times throughout the day. And I've done this on myself. And it's just like, it's flatline because there's like very low carb. But then in the afternoon, there's just this little blip, and it's like not like a big response, but it's a different response than I had at any other time of day. And so understanding how your body processes glucose, if you have the opportunity, is actually really important because we all respond to foods differently. Some people have big responses to rice. Some people have big responses to breads, and it might be inverted, Bagels, for instance, might have a much bigger spike in your glucose than a donut would. And I've seen this on glucose data. And so it really does depend on the individual. And it depends on the time of day. Even sometimes it might have a big spike in the morning, but maybe a little bit more midday, like around lunch, it wouldn't be as big of a deal. Similarly, in that late afternoon, early evening, or even late night, you might have a much bigger response to a dessert than you would in the afternoon. So even just moving those kind of higher density carbs or treats, or even healthy carbs that are really heavy carb, to kind of your midday, where you're still going to be active, your body's fully awake and able to digest, is probably going to be a better situation. The other thing is the cadence of food. So a lot of times there's a few different adages here, like how frequently should you eat? I think a lot of it kind of comes back to 3 meals a day with 1 or 2 snacks, tends to be where it's going. And depending on how you look at it, it's all over the board. There's been a lot of research saying you should snack, have 6 small meals or even 17 small meals. And those are really done to avoid binge eating, especially in individuals who are trying to lose weight or had a hard time with binge eating. But if you don't eat frequently enough, say you have 1 meal a day or 2 meals a day, you actually have a much larger glucose response in response to that food that you do have. So having not too long of a fasting period in between your meals, once you start eating, but your meal, from the first thing you have to the last thing you have should probably be around 10 hours. And so within that time, that 14-hour fast, you're mainly asleep. You need that longer duration fast so you can break down all those nutrient stores. But once you're eating, I'd say, probably like 3 to 4 caloric events throughout the day, and keeping them on the higher protein side, lower carb side. Make sure you're getting fiber so you stay satiated, towards the evening, and then have most of your, more than 50% of your calories in the first half of your day, and try to kind of push it to either breakfast or lunch. And depending on what your body's telling you. If you're starving in the morning and you want a bigger breakfast and a little lighter lunch, sure. Or if you're not a big into breakfast and do a bigger lunch, I think either of those can be fine, depending on your body and how you're feeling. But yeah, just a ton of sugar in the morning is probably not the best.
Absolutely. And yeah, nutrition science is so hard.
Yeah.
Like there's so many different things that go into it. And, you know, someone like people have these ideas in their heads of certain foods that cause a glucose spike. And now with some of this glucose monitoring technologies and some research on this, we're seeing like someone might have a greater glucose spike to eating a banana compared to eating white rice. And someone might have the complete opposite. And like you said, it can also matter. The same person could eat that banana and have a different response throughout the day. So
Absolutely.
There's a ton that go into this, but I think that kind of the general recommendation coming back to like protein before bed, it sounds like since it's mainly just having protein, you're probably not causing a huge glucose spike. However, you're still adding some more food for your body to kind of break down and digest. So back to the street sweepers, you don't necessarily allow that to kind of come and clear through because you're still adding more food there right before bed. So the recommendation is still kind of avoiding food within a couple of hours before sleep. It sounds like it still stands even when having like just a single protein there. And maybe to kind of wrap up here and do some final takeaways, and I'll kind of try to give a few takeaways I have, and then you can correct me where I'm wrong here, but it sounds like generally speaking, someone should probably be limiting the kind of total window that they're eating throughout the day to somewhere around like a 10-hour period. And specifically, maybe not eating in that first hour after they wake up. And then also not eating within the kind of final 2 to 3 hours before they go to bed. And then kind of within that, also making sure to have the majority of their calories, like maybe 50+% in that earlier portion of the day. And we didn't touch on this a ton, but also maybe having a consistent feeding pattern from day to day to where they kind of eat at similar times in all those increments. And I think I'm covering some of the main takeaways that I have, but what would you kind of add to that, or what would you kind of correct there?
No, I think you summarized it really well. I think really just if you think of a big picture, if you're ever asking yourself like, okay, how do I make this fit my life? The idea is to, use light and food and exercise as ways of consistently telling your body what time of day it is. Your molecular clocks can't read the clock on the wall. They get these behavioral cues, right? So just like you said, wake up with light if you can. Give yourself a second to wake up before you eat, be active and eat and get lots of light in the first half of your day. And then as your day goes down, you kind of dim those cues. And by the end of your day, at least 3 hours before you go to bed, you should really not be giving any more stimulation. You should be making sure you're starting to rest. You're not eating, you're getting dimmer light or less or no light, probably dim light. Probably not awake for 3 hours with zero light, but dim light. And really just kind of making sure that you're kind of giving these natural cues, and then your body's going to thank you for it and you're going to feel better. And I think you mentioned a few times, we've all had that experience where we did do kind of the right things and we felt really good at that time, or we've all been jet lagged where we feel horrible. And I think that's why a lot of people, I actually never knew this until I was far into the field. I'd only learned about circadian rhythms through hard science, but that it does feel kind of, some people think it's more of a hippie science or like it's not real science. And it's because it is so relatable. You can feel it. You can feel how your body is doing differently when you're working with your clocks versus you're fighting your clocks. And unfortunately, in modern society, we frequently abuse our clocks because we can. We have access to food and light and entertainment 24 hours a day, and we take advantage of that. And I think a lot of it's we're just forgetting how important those cues really are. We really didn't know how important a lot of those cues were to our overall health, how we're feeling, how our body sleeps, how we function. And it's hard to just say, this does this one thing, because it doesn't. I mean, you have a clock in every cell of your body, every system responds to it. And it's so intertwined that, not, eating late at night or compromising your sleep late at night through food or light or exercise is going to affect your mood. It's going to affect your digestion. It's going to affect so many different things. And it changes kind of how you function. And so depending on what you're predisposed to or what might be a sensitive issue for you, that's probably what you're going to feel the most, right? And so it express itself in different ways. But if you just kind of keep this big picture of, I'm going to work with my clocks, I'm going to tell them it's daytime with bright light and food during the earlier day and exercise during the day and then cool down at night. I think that's kind of the big picture of what we're trying to achieve here. We can get into specific numbers and things like that. But if you keep that in mind, I think that's a good way to adjust your behaviors to your specific schedule.
And I think it's even good to focus on like just conceptually big picture, because if we try to get like too crazy specific, like you said, people have different individual responses to all this stuff, in which, you know, what works really well for one person A's circadian rhythms and clocks might not be great for another person's.
Yeah.
But kind of that big picture takeaways are really good. And I really liked your point on, in modern society, like we kind of have to go back to certain patterns that we would have done just naturally. Like, you know, 100 years ago, we'd probably just, you know, get up when the sun comes up, go to bed when the sun goes down. Wouldn't have a phone in our face until like we're literally scrolling like at night in bed. I know my girlfriend definitely does that. And well, I'll have to
we all
this
do
podcast.
It. It's not good.
Yeah.
It's a hard thing to discipline. There's actually a really cool study a few years ago that took people camping for a week, and the only light they could have at night was firelight. And they instantly like had better rhythm. They fell asleep a little earlier. They woke up a little earlier. They were more rested, and they found out what their rhythms really were. And there's still going to be a spectrum. Some people are still later than others. It kind of gets to your chronotype and how your body interprets these cues. But really kind of detaching from all that artificial sensation and that, you know, excess of food availability, and kind of getting back to a more natural habit. So if you have time to go camping for a week or two with just firelight at night, I strongly recommend it. Understand your own circadian rhythms. Most of us don't have that much time, but you can mimic it by just like not using a lot of artificial light or really dimming lights, and, you know, trying to control your food. You know, challenge yourself for 2 weeks and see how you feel, and then adjust it, you know. But those things can make a really big difference. And a lot of people stick with it after they try it because they just feel so much better. And it's just these little tweaks, you know, it's free to do. It's non-invasive. It's not a medication. It's not going to hurt you. It's safe to try. But just really trying to give your body what it needs and stop confusing it with all these kind of bizarre cues that have kind of manifested over the past few decades.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, if you can just like tweak your current daily routine just to be a little bit more favorable when it comes to this stuff, I think it can make a big difference. Like to this day, my workout occurs in the morning because I noticed that it just helps me sleep better at night. So I think with that, Dr. Manoogian, we definitely could have covered a ton more stuff. And I know you have a lot more kind of talks and content that you do and stuff like that. So if people want to kind of stay up to date with what you're doing, if they want to stay up to date with your research and stuff like that, where should they kind of go to find that stuff?
Yeah, so we actually run a smartphone app through our lab that's fully in lab. It's not commercialized at all, called My Circadian Clock. It's free to download for iPhones and Androids. You can track your own rhythms. You can kind of see where you are and then set goals for yourself. And you can track food, sleep, exercise, even when you meditate, and all those good things. So you can kind of get an idea what's going on and also give us information on when people eat and how people are affected by changing that. You can find more information from the lab there as well. And you could find us through the Salk websites, Twitter at Emily Manoogian, or you can always just kind of do a Google Scholar search for any of the current papers that are out. We try to make sure everything's openly available.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.